to join. Silakan Bu Iris, if you want to start.
Mau dimulai aja Pak? Atau nunggu sebentar? Ini Pak Rizal mau ikut gabung Pak. Bentar
ya,
Pak.
Dibuka aja. Oh, ada 53. Apa namanya? 1 menit lagi mungkin. Kita belum jam 1. It's still not yet 1 minute more.
1 more minute, yes.
1 more minute. It seems that
Pak Rizal sudah masuk.
you have a lot of attendee here. 79, 78
9 participants, yes.
participants, yeah.
80 now.
80 now.
Hello, TK, how are you?
Very good, Pak Rizal.
Yeah, nice to meet you again.
Nice to see all of you, yes.
How is construction in Australia now?
We are all back to normal now. So there is no more restriction. Our cases are very.
Okay, can we start now? I think already 88 participants. Ya, silakan Bu Iris. So Bu Iris will lead the session. Please, Bu Iris.
Okay. Thank you, Pak for this guest lecture. Selamat siang semuanya. Bapak can join with us and hope you can share and your knowledge on Australian. How about construction in start to present your experience and your
Bu Iris, it seems that you have trouble with the connection. So, ya suaranya hilang.
Ya, hilang.
Ya, hilang. So I think Pak Tike, it's your time now to share things related to the construction safety and also health and COVID. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Allow me to share my screen. PowerPoint.
Already? Isti? Yeah, okay.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Clear.
Very clear. Thank you very much. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about the COVID-19 protocol and its impact on the construction industry in Australia. So my name is Dr. Toong Khuan-Chan. I teach at the Melbourne School of Design at the University of Melbourne. So I've been an academic at the University of Melbourne for the last 12 years. And I've visited ITB several times over the last 2 or 3 years, and I know most of your academics very, very well. For example, Pak Krishna, Pak Rizal, Ibu Iris, and many of the other colleagues at ITB. They have welcomed me very warmly at ITB, and I think it's a good opportunity that we get to speak on a topic like this today. So without wasting too much time, let me just very quickly get on to the content of my presentation. I'll be talking a little bit about introducing a little bit about the differences between Australia and Indonesia. I'll then talk about the border closures, what actually happened during the time in 2020 when we closed our borders, we locked down the majority of the population in Melbourne, and the border closures, the social distancing. I will then talk about the health risks, specifically for construction sites. I will spend a little bit of time talking about the supply chain disruption and what we did with construction contracts. I will also talk about how the Australian government responded to the COVID-19 and how they provided assistance to the construction workers, to other workers as well, and the stimulus packages to get the economy going again. It also gives me an opportunity to talk about the construction industry in general and how we can think or take this COVID-19, we see the consequences and use this as an opportunity to change the construction industry. All right. And with you in Indonesia, maybe it's time for us to sit down and think about how we can change the industry. So this is just one slide to very briefly tell us about the differences between Indonesia and Australia. Australia is your neighboring country. We're just right next to you. We are several times larger than you in terms of land size. but our population is less than 1/10 of your population. Now, if you look at GDP in terms of US dollars, we are just about 30% larger than you in terms of GDP. But because we have a much smaller population, our GDP per capita is more than 10 times larger than you. If you then look at construction, all right, we're all interested in the construction industry. If you just look at the construction industry, we built or we spend, the construction output is about 278 billion US dollars. Sometimes I use US dollars, sometimes I use Australian dollars, but because we are comparing Australia and Indonesia, I'm just using US dollars. It's a lot easier. So our construction output is significantly higher than Indonesia's construction output. We have a total of 1.1 million workers in the construction industry, and the construction share of GDP is about 9%, whereas in Indonesia, you have, from your Badan Pusat statistics, you have 1 million permanent workers and about 7 or 8 million casual workers in your construction industry. And your share of GDP, being a developing country, is about 11%, which is actually a very good percentage. Now, one very large difference between Australia and Indonesia is the rate at which the government can borrow money. Now, this is very important, how much the government pays in terms of interest, because that has a direct influence on how much money the government can spend on infrastructure. Now, in Australia, a few months ago when I was talking to Pak Krishna, the government bond rate was 0.8%. It has gone up very slightly to about 1%. So that's the amount of interest that the government pays for a 10-year bond. So if the government were to borrow money for 10 years, they pay approximately 1% interest. All right. Now, in comparison, the Indonesian government will have to pay 6.34%. So that tells us, or that gives you a rough idea of how much your government has to pay to build infrastructure, because most governments need to borrow money to build infrastructure or to build houses. Now, this is a very interesting figure. I hope you can see it clearly. I'm just comparing the daily confirmed cases of COVID-19 between Australia and Indonesia. I got this, I think, 2-3 days ago. Now, if you look at the Australian one is actually very hard to see on this slide because our numbers are actually very, very small. If I were to annotate, you should be able to see that this is the first spike in in Australia. This is our second spike, and it is very close to zero right now. We have almost no local transmission of COVID-19 in Australia today. If I go on to the next slide, where the x-axis is plotted on the log scale, it's a bit clearer. So this is our first spike, and our first spike coincided with Indonesia's increase in cases. So that was when international travelers traveled a lot in February, in March, and when travelers came back from overseas, they brought COVID-19 into Australia. Very similar to Indonesia. Now, but the difference is that we stopped international travelers from coming straight into the community. We had a very stringent hotel quarantine system, and we shut down internal borders. We had a very strict lockdown of the community. So the first spike was brought down under control within a very, very short time. Now, if you have questions, I will maybe pause after about 5 or 6 slides to allow you the opportunity to ask questions. You can ask questions either in English or in Bahasa. I come from Malaysia, so I can understand some of your questions in Bahasa Indonesia. Okay, so if you need to stop me and ask questions, please, by all means, just stop me, unmute yourself, and you can ask questions. Now, this is a much more detailed view of what actually happened in Australia. So as I've shown you earlier, the first spike started in March. We managed to shut down a lot of the community transmission by having a very strict lockdown. We closed our borders, mandatory isolation in hotels, so hotel quarantine for all travelers returning to Australia. And within a period of 2 months, so March, April, we managed to bring it all down to nearly zero. So that was what we call a very successful quarantining system. Even though we had to declare a state of emergency on the 16th of March, borders were closed on the 20th of March, very strict lockdown on the 25th of March. By 12th of May, the restrictions were eased. We no longer, well, we never had to wear masks. We just had to socially distance, stay at home. Now, but what happened sometime in July, or in June, July, was that we continued to take in Australian travelers returning from overseas. And because of poor procedures at one of the quarantine hotels, we had a second spike. So it was quite unfortunate that we managed to allow the COVID-19 cases to leak out from hotel quarantine, and that caused a second spike in Melbourne. So this was isolated only to Melbourne and the state of Victoria. And by 8th of July, the entire metro Melbourne was locked down. So from July until end of September, it was a very strict lockdown in Melbourne. And eventually we eased the restrictions on the 8th of November, 2020. Now from November until now, we have very, very few cases. And that will somewhat explain some of the safety and health precautions by the construction industry. So you have to understand that we had 2 spikes and we are now very close to zero. There is no more community transmission. I think there has been no community transmission for the last 2 weeks. The only cases we have today are from international travelers who have come back from the US, from Europe with COVID, right? They are isolated in hotel quarantine and pose very, very little risk to the community. They are quarantined and they will not be released until after 14 days of quarantine. So that is pretty good news for us. So let's look at the stay-at-home restrictions. On the 30th of March, 2020, we call that a stage 3 restriction. And there were only 4 reasons we could give to leave home: shopping for food and supplies, seeking medical care, or caregiving. Caregiving basically means that you are providing care to your parents or to elderly relatives. You can exercise, provided you don't go in the car and travel 200 kilometers to exercise. You can exercise near your home. You can also travel to study or to work if you cannot work from home. Now, the most important thing to understand for this period of 30th March until 8th of July was that the restrictions did not apply to the building and infrastructure sector. So there were no cases in the construction industry. None of the construction workers were infected with COVID-19. So there were no restrictions. So the construction industry could remain operational. Okay, so construction industry was not affected at all. And I will talk a little bit more about how they managed to do that. Now, unfortunately, during the second COVID spike, stage 4 restrictions were brought in. And on the 2nd of August 2020, stage 4 restrictions were more stringent than stage 3 restrictions. It was stage 3 plus a curfew from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., meaning to say that we could not leave our homes from 8 p.m. at night to 5 a.m. the next morning. We were limited to 5 kilometers from home. So these restrictions were put in to ensure that the COVID-19 did not spread in Melbourne. Unfortunately, the construction industry was affected. So we'll talk about this later. 2 construction sites had COVID cases, and because of that, the government had to shut down construction sites. Infrastructure construction projects were reduced to 50% of their workforce, and building construction was reduced to 25% of the workforce. Okay, so that created a lot of problems for the construction industry in Melbourne. Now, remember, the second spike was only in Melbourne and the state of Victoria. So only one state was affected. All the other states had very, very small numbers. So their construction industries continued to operate without restrictions. Okay, so we now talk about the construction industry. During the initial stages of the COVID-19, the construction industry did not wait for the government to issue guidelines. The construction industry came out on its own. So all the organizations you see up here, these are all non-government organizations. These are industry organizations who came together and developed their own guidelines and proposed this response plan to the government. All right. So this is not waiting for the government to tell you what to do. This is the construction industry developing their own guidelines based on medical advice. So they developed their own guidelines. They proposed their own response plan, mainly to minimize and avoid closure of construction sites. The industry knew that if you don't take action, the government will shut you down. Okay? The industry knew that they had to ensure that the workplaces were safe, that jobs are kept, and that projects remain running. Because if they shut the projects down, if there are COVID cases on the project site, the government and the health department will shut them down. So the main motivation was to minimize and avoid closure of construction site. They knew that they had to implement the response plans before they had any COVID-19 cases. So these are some of the measures that they suggested. These are what they will implement. So they started screening workers coming to site. They had to ensure that the workers who came to work had no symptoms and were not in close contact with anyone with COVID. Number 2, workplace mapping. I think some of these points are very similar to what you see in Indonesia, right? Workplace mapping, records were taken every day, every location of work. So every worker on a construction site had to record where they work, which part of the project they work, if it is a high-rise construction, which floor, which apartment unit, and which day, which time of day. All that had to be recorded because that will then allow the construction company to very quickly trace who was exposed to which other worker. Physical distancing, enforcing safe distances at work. I think over here we use 1.5 meters as the recommended safe distance. The pattern of work was shifted. They have a staggered start. So some workers will start at 7 a.m. Some workers will start at 7:30. Some workers will start at 8. The break time was also staggered, and the shift patterns were changed to ensure that the workers had as little overlap with other workers as possible. Hygiene, hand washing, how you cough, hand sanitizers, soaps, bins, and waste management processes were improved. Workers were encouraged to avoid sharing tools. Most of the construction workers in Australia are skilled workers. We do not have what you call unskilled workers. Most of the workers here are skilled. They come and they bring their own tools, right? Most of the skilled workers will bring their own tools. So the idea here is that they do not share tools. Even with hand tools are not shared, saws, all other machineries and all that usually is not shared. So if you do not share those equipment, plant and equipment, there's a smaller chance of transmission of COVID. Cleaning and disinfecting the amenities, the meal areas, door handles, personnel hoists, all those were cleaned after every shift. So that was another action that the construction industry took. The most difficult problem that the construction industry identified was personnel hoist. If you work on a construction site, a high-rise construction site, there is always an alimac, which is a lift for all the workers to go up and down. This is usually the most confined space and the most likely place of COVID-19 transmission. So at those locations, face mask was required for all occupants in the hoist. There was a very clear sequence of moving in to the lift and moving out from the lift, and a schedule for workers. Now, usually if you have a 10-story building, your personnel hoist is not so much of a problem. Many of the buildings in Melbourne city itself goes up to about 40 stories. And when you are at about 20 stories to 40 stories, the personnel hoist becomes a huge constraint. There are lots of workers trying to get in at the same time, lots of workers trying to get out at the end of the shift. So having the personnel hoist with cleaned regularly, having staggered working times will help the spread of COVID at construction sites. Personnel protective equipment, as I've mentioned, face masks were only required during the second spike, and face masks were no longer required after 6th of December 2020. This is just an example of what the recommendations were. So this was all produced by the construction industry. They did not have to wait for the government to give them guidelines, right? So these were all agreed by the construction companies and they produced this themselves. So this is an example of waiting to get into the hoist. You stand 1.5 meters away, you move in from the left and you walk out to the left as well. So that's how they managed the queuing process and the entry and exit to a passenger hoist. Other measures, common areas, they limit the time in common areas. They have meal breaks at different times. They separate work groups. So the plumbers would only eat with plumbers. You don't mix the electricians and the plumbers and the carpenters and the tilers. So every trade was physically separated. Inspections, you have safety inspectors. Now, because of COVID, they actually created a new position called a COVID marshal. This is something like a supervisor, a safety supervisor, specifically given the responsibility to support site compliance for COVID-19 guidelines and regulations. So they created this role within most of the large construction companies to enforce and to provide advice for COVID-19 rules. Travel, they limited the number of people in vehicles just because some of the workers will be traveling together to go to a construction site. And if you are having more than one person in a car, they wear masks, all right? General communications, they produced lots of information for toolbox and site induction talks. one very interesting thing about Australia is that we are a migrant country. We have people from many different countries moving to live in Australia. Now, the difficulty of having people coming in from different countries to live and work in Australia is that not all of them speak English. So they had to produce communication material in 16 different languages. So that was another interesting thing, right? They had to produce all the communication material in 16 different languages. And that allowed workers with different backgrounds to also understand the importance of these COVID regulations. Vulnerable workers. Now, in Australia, the Aboriginal workers, the Torres Strait Islanders, some of the older workers are considered vulnerable workers, and they were specifically given additional advice and additional protection, okay, to ensure that they do not get COVID-19. One of the most dangerous positions in a construction site was the hoist operator. Remember, we said that the passenger hoist was a high risk location. So the hoist operator had to be sanitized. They would need hand sanitizers. They would need face masks, and very often need full PPE as well. So face masks, sometimes with a shielded mask and all that, to ensure that they themselves are not exposed to COVID-19. There was temperature screening at all construction sites. If you're above 37.5, you're not allowed to enter. The procedure is that you rest for 30 minutes and then get retested. If you are still high, rest again and retested with an ear thermometer. So the first thermometer is one of those thermometers where you just shoot with a non-contact thermometer. The next one will be an ear thermometer. And if you are above 37.5 degrees Celsius, they will then ask you to seek medical attention. Now, employee relations. The construction industry here in Australia is very controlled by the construction unions. That also means that every construction worker and their employer are locked into an employment contract, what we call an enterprise agreement. So an enterprise agreement is a union-approved employment contract for all the construction workers within one construction company. All right. So there are very strict rules about how workers who need to stay at home. Now, you remember this, during the first spike, and I think it happened in Indonesia as well, schools were closed. So children had to stay at home. They could not go to school. And that means that some of the workers cannot go to work. They have to stay at home to look after the children. So that basically meant that some of the workers could take what they call carers leave. So of course, in the employment contract, there are some days that you can take as carers leave. There are additional days that they can go on long service leave and all that. So a lot of all these regulations have to be taken into account. Now, if the site is actually shut down by the government, then the workers can or have to be redeployed. They could be working from home, but they very often have to continue to be paid. So this is where the industry is very proactive when it comes to ensuring that COVID-19 does not affect construction sites. Right? The employment contract says that you have to continue paying your workers. So the construction companies themselves are very, very keen to ensure that the project runs. Because if the project doesn't run, they have a huge responsibility to ensure that the workers are put onto other projects, the workers working from home. You understand that construction is an industry where it's very hard for them to work from home. They could, of course, stand down the workers. Standing down the workers basically means telling them that they do not have a job. So it's possible to stand down the workers without pay, but they still have to follow the enterprise agreement, the terms of their contractual employment contract. There is a Fair Work Act to permit some of the employers to use government money to keep some of the workers employed. So I'll talk about the JobKeeper program in a little while. WorkSafe is another government agency. So WorkSafe, which is a government agency responsible for occupational health and safety. So they used to be the health inspectors for the construction industry. So they came up with their own set of guidelines as well. And as you can see, the guidelines are pretty much the same. Screening for COVID, site mapping, physical distancing, hygiene, shared tools, cleaning. So all the guidelines produced by the government are exactly the same as the guidelines produced by the same industry. All right. So this worked very, very well. So from March until July, this response plan worked very, very well. There were very, very few cases on construction sites, and everyone was happy. The construction industry was completely unaffected, okay? Because if you can continue operating, there was no reduction in the number of workers. It was not really a problem. So what happened after that? Now, unfortunately, when the second spike occurred, there was, when the COVID-19 leaked out of hotel quarantine, lots of the residents living in Melbourne were affected by COVID. So it is natural that the construction industry was also hit. All right. So the largest single case at the end of July was the builder in a tall building in Melbourne had 12 cases. So 12 workers were confirmed COVID-19 positive. And then a few days after that, another construction site had cases. So unfortunately, when 2 of these construction sites had cases, the entire city eventually got locked down. So as you can see from this picture over here, they were enforcing all these guidelines rigorously. But even then, we believe that the transmission was not at the construction site, but at other places. Okay. So this is what happened. Stage 4 restrictions commenced on the 16th of August. So that was very, very strict. We divided, or rather the government divided construction into 2 categories, the large scale construction site and small scale construction site. The large scale construction site was defined as projects more than 3 stories high or larger than 1,500 square meters of floor size, or if the project is an office or a commercial project. Now, if you are a large scale construction site, no more than 25% of your workers can go to site. So can you imagine if you have 100 workers on a construction site? Usually those tall towers in the city would have maybe 100, 150 workers. If you have 100 workers, you are only allowed 25. Okay. Now it's not 25 skilled workers. It is 25 total number of workers. So if you start counting in the project management staff, the site safety staff, okay, the security staff, you have very, very few workers actually carrying out the work, right? So 25% of the workforce is very restrictive. We also have small scale construction site. Now, small scale construction site is any project that is not defined as a large scale construction site. So that was limited to only 5 workers. So that is even more stringent, okay? 5 workers. If it is an enclosed workspace, for example, a residential building, not more than 1 worker per 4 square meters. There was also a limit of workers between different sites. Now, I have to explain that building of houses in Australia is very different compared to the construction of houses in Asia. Over here in Australia, we built the houses one by one. We do not have a housing estate where you build 200 houses in one contract. Okay, we built our houses one at a time. Now, if you build one house at a time, sometimes you can have an electrician going to house A on Monday, going to house B on Tuesday, and going to house C on Wednesday. So they had to put in this restriction to limit the number of workers moving between different sites. Because if they move between different sites, that's a high possibility of transferring COVID-19. All right, so that was the difference. We have our residential projects are all single house projects. So we had to limit the number of workers. With only 5 workers on site, this became a huge constraint on construction productivity. The next group of projects were what we call critical infrastructure projects. So these are projects that the government thinks are strategic projects, are critical for health and safety. So these projects include our metro tunnel. It includes hospital projects. So obviously a hospital project should continue. So critical infrastructure projects continue to operate at normal workforce levels. Remember I spoke about how construction of houses are done differently. So this is just an example of how we build houses in Australia. We do not build all the houses at one time. We build them one at a time. So if you look over here, you can see that each of these houses are built independently, and it's a separate contract for every single house. So stage 4 restrictions, which started on the 16th of August, ended, or rather eased on the 28th of October 2020, and eventually completely removed on the 2nd of January this year. So from 28th September to 2nd of January, for large-scale construction sites, they could have up to 85% of the workforce. So can you imagine? So from August to September, they were down to 25%. From September onwards, they went up back to 85%. So that basically tells us that once the city of Melbourne managed to control COVID-19, the construction industry went back to 85%. Small-scale construction still had the limit of 1 worker per 4 square meters, and limitation of workers moving from different sites remained. Critical infrastructure could continue at normal workforce levels. Okay, what is the responsibility of the employer? So the employer basically had a duty to provide and maintain a safe working environment. So the responsibility to enforce and implement these COVID regulations and guidelines was placed with the employer. So the activities that were identified as high risk was traveling in personnel hoists, work that requires employees to be in close contact with others, using shared tools, shared facilities. So all these actions had to be taken by the employer, right? Earlier, some of the discussion was what are the guidelines for workers. These are the guidelines that the employer had to provide. So the contractors have to ensure that the personnel traveling in the hoist and lifts were adequately protected. Now, let me spend, before I continue, any questions so far? Are there any questions from the audience?
Maybe TK, maybe I have several questions. Hello.
Yes, go ahead, Pak Rizal.
Yes, you mentioned that the second outbreak was happened in August.
Yes.
Does it relate with the season in Australia? We understand that in August you are in winter. Is it does it influence the transmissions is influenced by the season or not?
Okay, the actual reason for the second spike in COVID-19 is because one of the cleaners in the hotel quarantine was infected and continued working. All right, so it is actually one case that leaked out from hotel quarantine. The cleaner lives in a very large family and remained and continued working. So the one from one case, it spread out to 200 cases very, very quickly.
So it is nothing to do with the season, the winter, not at all. It is
it's one case.
It has been verified that it is not a spreading due to the winter or something like that. No.
No, because everybody was staying at home. Even I think you may find that Australia is very different from all of Europe and America, because in Australia we were all very compliant and all stayed at home. And we are very happy because we can now enjoy the freedoms that we have today. I can travel anywhere I want within Australia, and we don't have to wear masks when we go out. We only wear masks when we are at a shopping center. We only wear masks when we are in a supermarket, right? When we go into a restaurant, we don't have to wear masks. We can go and visit friends. We can celebrate New Year. Everything's good. So that is the difference. We managed to control it, and it's very painful initially, especially under the curfew conditions where we were only allowed to travel 5 kilometers from home.
Okay. So the very important keyword is discipline. It is nothing to do with the environment.
Nothing to do with the environment, yes. What they say, duduk di rumah diam-diam, or duduk diam-diam di rumah.
Oke. Tapi bagaimana itu orang Eropa juga disiplin toh? Mengapa sekarang di Eropa mereka punya problem dan Australia tidak pernah naik lagi? Apakah disiplin itu merupakan kata kunci? Dan itulah cara satu-satunya untuk mengatasi.
Yes, I think that it's all to do with discipline and whether they are willing to stay in lockdown. You can see that over the last few days when Netherlands were locked down or were in curfew at night, many of the people didn't agree. They go and protest. Okay. So that's the difference. Are you willing to stay locked down? Okay, so what I'll do now is talk a little bit about supply chain, what happened to the construction supply chain, and I'll also talk about how the government ensured that people remain making money. They are given enough money to stay at home. You see, there is a reason for staying at home. You have to make sure that they do not starve. You see, if you don't have money, you cannot work and you are forced to stay at home, you will protest, correct? So the government also have to help those who are stuck at home. And my presentation will explain how the assistance came from the government. Are there any other questions, Pak Rizal?
Yes, the second question on your slide, if I'm not mistaken, slide number 3, you mentioned, if I'm not, I'm well taken, that in building, the construction reduced 50%, but in other civil work, only 25%. Is it right or?
Sorry, which one?
building reduced 50%. Civil, where is it? Where is it?
This one, large scale construction.
Yeah, no. I miss. Before I think you mentioned somewhere that in civil in building infrastructures that the activity reduced 50%. Does it relate to the concentration of the workers, while
No.
in civil work it reduced only 25%? Is it what I?
Yes, it restricts number of workers. To 50%. So infrastructure, because they are working in an open space, many of the infrastructure have more social distancing. So the building sites were reduced to 25% of the workforce. Some of the infrastructure projects were reduced to 50% of the workforce.
This is the right slide. So infrastructure, they have more space, so it's reduced only 50%. Okay, my last questions. Why is the Aboriginal is considered vulnerable? I'm sorry for the question. Why?
They do not look after their health.
Okay.
Many of them do not look after their health. So they start off with being less healthy. Some of them are overweight. Some of them have underlying medical problems. So that is why when during the first spike, the first state that we cannot travel to was Northern Territory. So they wanted to prevent COVID from going to the Northern Territories, which have a higher proportion of Aboriginal Australians.
Okay, my very last question, TK. You mentioned there's a group of professionals like construction industry. They take initiative early than governments. Does it happen to the other in other industry groups, for example? If you have any other community, does it happens also that they show initiative early than government? What do you think? How do you conclude this? Because do you see it is a development that a professional community could always take early initiative and better initiative than government? What do you think?
We believe that the other sectors like manufacturing and some of those in the more critical sectors of the economy also developed their own guidelines before government gave them the guidelines. So it is a lot easier if you produce the guidelines yourselves and then the government just agrees to your guidelines. So for example, the manufacturing industry that were producing critical materials came up with their own guidelines. The food industry came up with their own guidelines. The transportation industry came up with their own guidelines. Because if you wait for the government will be very slow to respond. The government has to look after all the industries. But if your industry is well organized, you very quickly come up with your own guidelines to ensure that your sector is not affected. You see, we were very successful. The industry came up with their own guidelines and prevented COVID-19 during the first spike.
Okay, that is the real characteristic of a professional community. A good community is the community that could regulate themselves.
Yes.
And the better government is the government who only rules very, very small. Okay, thank you.
No, I think it's very common sense, right? Because if you wait for the government will shut you down. If you regulate yourself, you minimize and avoid your projects being shut down, then you get to operate. If the construction industry is like this, you cannot work from home. It's not like university. University, we can work from home. I'm at home, your students, my students are at home, but construction, you cannot work from home. So you have to come up with a plan to prevent your workers from getting COVID, and you can continue operating. So that is the most, well, the motivation is more important.
Okay. So you can compare now what is the professionalism of Indonesian construction industry and Australian construction industry. Thank you, TK.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Ayo adik-adik mahasiswa, ada yang ditanyakan?
Saya mau izin nanya, Bu.
Oke, silakan.
This is still in regard with the question of Mr. Rizal, Mr. TK. You said that in every person in Australian, being Australians is you motivated yourself for being stay at home, and I actually really want to know that is it really any other penalties from the government itself for any citizens that don't follow the rules? Any penalties for them? And the second one, for the guidelines, is it the guidelines? The making of the guidelines is for the whole industry, or each company itself making their own guidelines, and then they book it, they compile it in one guideline, so they make it in one book. I think that's
your two questions. Okay, very good question. In terms of penalty, yes, there are always people who do not like to follow the law, and the police will catch them and give them a fine. Until today, we think that not many people have paid the fine. Okay, the police can issue the fine, but the people don't pay. We haven't decided what to do with them. But generally, it is quite successful that as long as 95% of the people are compliant, stay at home, then we can control the virus. Your second question about guidelines is, it is not developed by individual companies. If you look at it's a bit too small for you to see, right? But the organizations here are industry organizations. So they are like the Master Builders Association. They are groups of industry, groups of companies. They come together and produce the guidelines together. So you don't have to have individual guidelines for each company. They all agree that all the companies in the state of Victoria will adopt this. So it is very, very easy to implement. All the companies do the same thing. Okay, I hope that answers your question. So it is not developed by one company. They come together, just like your Indonesian Contractors Association, GAPNC, or some of them, they come together and develop the guidelines as an organization, as an industry organization. So that automatically ensures that every single company adopt the same guidelines and regulations for their respective workforces. Ibu Iris, are there any other questions?
Ya.
Me, please.
Oke, siapa
Irfan.
yang mau bertanya tadi? Silakan.
My name is Irfan.
Yeah.
I have a question. You said that a person would be tested with an in-ear thermometer if the non-contact thermometer shows a number above 37.5 degrees. I went to a mall yesterday to buy something. I went out of my car. It had air conditioner on, and when the staff tested me with the non-contact thermometer, it showed about 34.5 degrees. And if that was my actual temperature, I won't even be here right now. My question is the current method really effective to prevent a transmission of COVID? Because I think it's really possible for a non-contact thermometer to show a number lower than the actual temperature. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with you that non-contact thermometers are not terribly accurate. I think it's just one of many measures. You cannot rely on just one. I think you rely on non-contact thermometer. You also rely on your workers being honest. The worker has to tell the employer that if I'm not healthy, I do not come to work. Okay? And there is a reason for this, because the government actually pays workers to stay at home. So later on, I'll show you what actually happened. If you are unwell, if you go for testing, you are actually paid money to stay at home. You do not have to go to work. So that takes away the motivation to have to go to work. Because if you put yourself in the situation of a construction worker, if you don't work, you don't get paid, then many of them will try to go to work. But if you are paid to go for testing and stay at home, the outcome will be slightly different. So I think the motivation to honestly declare that if you feel unwell, you stay at home, that is very important. All right. Yes, any other questions?
Oke, ada lagi yang bertanya? Silakan, dalam bahasa Indonesia juga boleh. Ya.
Okay, if there are no questions, let me continue and we can continue this discussion with questions later on. So let me just talk a little bit about the supply chain. The issue with Australia is that we procure or we buy a lot of our building materials from overseas. Okay, so in residential construction, the main contractor does not carry out any construction work. They subcontract concrete, they subcontract carpentry, they subcontract electrical, they subcontract plumbing. Everything is subcontracted out. So the main contractor only does construction management. So when you talk about a supply chain for the construction industry and having COVID-19 starting in China, so in January, February, many of the Chinese manufacturers that were supplying materials to Australian construction projects were affected, and there was a 1 to 2 month delay. Okay, so just think about that. We were working in January, February in China. Many of the factories were shutting down, and we could, many of the builders and contractors said that there was going to be a 1 to 2 month delay in materials coming from China. When China recovered, so in the period of March to May 2020, China resumed production. They continued to start shipping, but then the problem was that shipping costs increased and the frequency of the ships sailing from China to Australia was reduced. So that was not just China-Australia trade, but global trade slowing down because of COVID-19. Now in July 2020, we got hit with our second spike. So the restrictions occurred in Melbourne. Don't forget that China is now producing at 100%. Okay, so China could produce, China could ship to Australia, but we could not take delivery. Remember I said that on the large construction sites, the number of workers were reduced to 25%. Now, if you have only 25% of workers on your construction site, how are you going to take delivery of your components coming to site? So that was a huge problem here. China was producing at 100%. We could not take delivery. All right. So that was what my students were investigating. We got them to very quickly investigate the supply chain disruption of COVID-19. Now, if you look at these figures here, the figure on the left is year 2000 of global trade. 2017 is, or the figure on the right is the situation in 2017. And you can see that our number one trading partner is now China, right? Previously, we used to import from Japan, Europe, and America. But because of changes in global trade, most of our construction materials today come from China. So this was a huge problem for us. This is the research done by my students at the University of Melbourne. So we can, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit more about this. Other times, so I've divided the periods into 4 periods. Before COVID, COVID in China, COVID in Australia, first spike, and then COVID in Australia, second spike. So there are 2 different situations here in Australia, right? Now, if you look at the order lead times, now if you want to buy a product from China and it has to be customized or specifically designed for your project sites, it would take about 2 to 2.5 months normally. But when COVID hit in China, there was something like a 1 month delay. So that increased to 2.5 to 3.5 months. When COVID struck us in Australia, there wasn't much impact at the China side. So it was still 2.5 to about 3 months. Delivery times from China increased, mainly because of delays in shipping. Now, if we were to compare buying the same materials from our own local suppliers, we can also look at local delivery times. So if we then look at local delivery times, these are, annotate, can I annotate? These are local, right? So previously, if we were to say to buy tiles from a local supplier, it would take 2 to 3 days. But when our COVID-19 struck in Melbourne, that was extended to about 3 to 7 days. That was basically delays due to problems with delivery. We could not unload the materials when it comes to the construction sites. Now, there were, of course, other issues like exchange rates. I'll show you graphs of how the exchange rates between Australia and the Chinese currency fluctuated over that period. Customs clearance for materials being imported. We needed an extra day for customs clearance, and shipping costs. Now, because of the issues with global trade, shipping costs actually changed quite substantially during this period of time. So let me show you some of the graphs. I have divided them into different periods: pre-COVID, COVID in China, COVID in Australia, and a second spike in Australia. So if you look at these figures, fluctuation in shipping costs. So it all depends on when your contract was signed and who pays for shipping. So these are shipping costs for a standard 20-foot container from the port of Shanghai to major ports in Australia. The cost was $940 before COVID. In March 2020, at the height of COVID in China, the cost of shipping came down, but the cost then went up to more than double at US $1,500 at the end of September 2020. So because of COVID and because of the issues with transportation, supply chain or cost of shipping materials from China to Australia changed drastically. So can you imagine if you are the project manager trying to get materials in, and it depends on who is paying for this cost, right? So it would be quite significant if you are buying a lot of materials from overseas. Contracts as well. So the Chinese suppliers, it all depends whether you're buying your products in Australian dollar or in Chinese yuan. Now, the builders that we spoke to, they were purchasing products from China in Australian dollars. So the Australian builders were not affected by the drop in the Australian dollar. So if you look over here, during that period, it was the Australian dollar that depreciated, okay? But because the supply contracts were all signed or were denominated in Australian dollar, the Australian builders were not affected. But unfortunately, if the payment was made during that period of time, the Chinese suppliers would be getting less money. So this is another lesson for contractors. They have to think about who carries foreign exchange risk, okay? The currency has actually recovered. The Australian dollar is now buying 5 Chinese yuan. So it is in our favor at over the last few days, 25th of January, 1 Australian dollar is now buying 5 Chinese yuan. So it all depends whether your contracts are signed in Chinese yuan or Australian dollar. So these are some of the risks that my students have discovered looking at the Australia-China supply chain. There were disruptions in production in China, delays in shipping, increase in shipping costs, and risks coming from foreign exchange. The disruption was not so much the disruption in China that caused the delay. The bulk of the disruption was in Australia itself. So you have to understand that disruption in the manufacturing site may not coincide with the disruptions at the construction site. So some of these issues have to be identified and studied accurately. So this is just information for you guys to think about when you are managing projects in Indonesia, right? If you are getting your materials from another country, there will be impact from the manufacturer's side and also impact at your local site. Construction contracts. Let me just very briefly talk about construction contracts. With COVID-19, you can talk about force majeure. So most Australian contracts, it's very strange. We do not have force majeure clauses in our contracts. And if it has a force majeure clause, it would not specifically cover COVID-19. Okay. So that's the problem with construction contracts here. The contractor will still have to try to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on its ability to perform its obligations under the contract. The relief is typically only available for the duration of the actual delay. So if you are delayed in terms of deliveries by 1 month, that is the actual impact. You will not be compensated for the total delay. You will only be compensated if you can prove that it was delayed for, say, a month. There's also a frustration clause. So a mere delay would not be considered sufficient to frustrate the contract. So most construction contracts have to continue. The only likely avenue for a claim by the contractor is using this change in regulation, because the social distancing regulations were put in by the government, so they can most likely claim for some delays, for some extension of time due to social distancing requirements, due to the number of workers being reduced on building sites. But it is still not clear whether the client will pay for the extra expense of your health screening, the extra PPE, or whether the losses will actually be compensated. There is a legal term called losses lie where they fall. So that basically means that the contractors may have pay for all additional costs, right? They may get an extension of time, but the extra costs to comply with the contract will have to be borne by the contractor. So this is, I'm not sure how Indonesia does that, but I think this is what's happening in Australia. Okay, so let's talk about government's response. There are two immediate responses from the government at the start of the COVID-19. One of them is called the Job Keeper program. So these are for workers that were already working. So it is for workers that are currently working. So eligible employees were then paid $1,500 per fortnight. So these are for employers that have suffered a reduction in revenue. Now, if a company is turning over more than 1 billion Australian dollars, if that company can prove that their revenue dropped by 30% or more, all their workers that were laid off would be eligible for this payment. Okay, so the employer pays each worker $1,500 every 2 weeks and claims this payment from the Australian Tax Office. So for example, you would understand that airline companies have very little revenue today. Very few planes are flying. So our national airline Qantas would be paying their workers $1,500 every 2 weeks and claiming that from the government. So this was implemented on the 30th of March 2020 until the 27th of September 2020. It was extended again to 28th of March 2021, but it's now reduced to 1,200, and after the 28th of March 2021, it will be further reduced to $1,000. All right. So employees or construction workers, if their company's revenues were affected and they don't have a job, the company can continue to pay them $1,500 per fortnight until September or until 28th of March, and then reduced to 1,200 and then further reduced to 1,000. So that is what we call the Job Keeper program. Now, another program is called the Job Seeker program. So these are for people who are currently unemployed and looking for work. Now, obviously, if you are unemployed and looking for work, you will not be able to find work. All right. But here in Australia, if you are unemployed, they can get this amount of money, if you are single, okay, no children, you get that amount every fortnight. But because of COVID-19, they get another $500. So that nearly doubles the amount of money each unemployed person gets from the government. So in total, they will be getting $1,115.70 every 2 weeks because of COVID-19. And that ended at 27 September 2020, but then it extended to December 2020, reduction to $250. So from $550, it reduced to $250. And then it will be further reduced to $150 from 1st of January 2021. So that is the coronavirus supplement. They will still get this. Okay, so today is the 26th of January. So today, they will be getting, those of you with good mathematics, it will be 567 plus 150. Okay, today they will be getting $567 plus $150 every 2 weeks under this Job Seeker program. There are other programs as well. This picture on the right is appears on my Facebook page. It basically says that if you are tested positive or are a close contact of someone who has tested positive, you get a one-off payment of $1,500 automatically. The moment you test positive or someone in your house tests positive and you are required to stay at home, you get $1,500. When you go for testing, and of course, the results don't come immediately, right? The moment you go for testing, you get a $450 payment while waiting for the results of your COVID test. So you now understand why it is possible to get construction workers to stay at home. You understand why we don't have to worry that the non-contact thermometer is not very accurate. Okay, the workers themselves may be willing to stay at home because they get money, they get a payment of $450 while waiting for test results. And if the test results are positive, they get $1,500. If the test results are negative, they go back to work. So I think this is quite a good incentive to ensure that the construction workers follow the social distancing programs. Now, let me just talk a little bit about the other stimulus measures. Over here in Australia, we have a state government and we also have a federal government. So the state government of Victoria put in together numerous economic stimulus packages. The JobKeeper and the Job Seeker program gives money directly to those who are in need of cash, but the government also tries to stimulate the economy by creating infrastructure projects and building projects. So the Victorian government building works, 2.7 billion additional money for 10 new schools, upgrading 57 schools, upgrading to social housing, community and tourism projects, roads and rail of approximately 2.7 billion additional spending. So that is supposed to revive the economy here in Victoria. The federal government, on the other hand, allocated $680 million, basically giving anyone who wants to build a new home or to renovate an existing home $25,000. So that directly provides a stimulus to the construction industry because home builders are part of the construction industry. And this is because back in 2008, the government learned from the global financial crisis by spending 16.2 billion back in 2008 to build schools. And that was very successful in stimulating construction, in delivering jobs and preventing the Australian economy from going into a recession. The federal government has promised as much as $160 billion stimulus. They've said that a few months ago, but we have not heard any firm proposals from the government yet. So we are still waiting for this $160 billion of government stimulus. Now, can we afford the stimulus measures? We think that the Australian government can, because we can borrow very cheaply over the next 10 years. Our bond rate is 1.1%. I think with Pak Krishna and Pak Bimo, we were talking about this. The bond rate was 0.8% a few months ago. It has gone up very slightly to 1.1%. So we should be able to borrow very cheaply and pay very small interest over the next 10 years for this stimulus package. So that, again, depends on how your economic situation in your country. We are able to borrow very cheaply. So we should borrow very cheaply to stimulate the construction industry. Your comparable rates in Indonesia, I think, are at about 6%. So it would be a lot more expensive for Indonesia to do the same thing. If you're interested, you can also have a look at how other countries did it. In Singapore, there were some additional rules where the government put in a clause that the clients could not sue the contractors for non-performance or non-delivery of products for 6 months. Okay, so that was a clause in the construction contracts, and to also share the cost of PPEs and the cost of project delay of up to 0.2% of the contract sum. All right, so that was some of the measures put in Singapore, if you are interested to look at what other countries are doing. Cost of testing will be funded by the government, and then there's a job support scheme, very similar to what Australia has done for the workers. Now, after talking about COVID, after talking about stimulus packages, we sometimes think that we could use COVID-19 as an opportunity to improve or disrupt the industry. All right, we have seen how the industry has been is so susceptible to disruptions. We can see that especially in Australia, how the supply chain buying a lot of products from China makes us very, very reliant on a foreign country to provide us with the materials. And if a disruption occurs in China, a disruption occurs in shipping, our construction industry would be severely affected. So these are some of the points that we may want to look at and think about how we can transform the industry. So we need to examine what the structure of the industry. So if you're in Indonesia, you have to see who is supplying your building materials, who's supplying your labor. There are issues like fragmentation. Many of the construction companies are small companies spread out over a very large area. So there's industry fragmentation, there's industry risk. Who is financing all this? Who is paying for the interest? Do you need to come up with business resilience plans? And you have also looked at new technologies. There's IT, there's BIM, there's blockchain, blockchain-linked contracts. You study about supply chains, you study about global trade. You've also seen prefabrication. I think your construction industry is looking at how to prefabricate a lot of the work to make it quicker to build, all right, to be less reliant on skilled workers. Over here, we talk about build to sell versus build to rent. So this is quite an interesting concept, build to sell versus build to rent. We are looking at how to get contractors and financiers to come together and invest in apartments for rental. So these are some of the concepts that we can talk about after the class. This is something that I want you guys to think about. We've spoken to Pak Krishna previously about this. If you think about construction versus manufacturing sector, let's take Boeing, for example, right? So if you look at Boeing as a company, the Boeing product, let's look at one product. Let's talk about the Boeing 737, okay? Who designs the Boeing 737? Boeing company themselves. Who finances the investment into the design and into manufacture? Boeing, and sometimes they borrow from the bank. Who provides the technology for the planes? Boeing provides the technology. They have partners for the jet engines, and they have partners for other bits of technology that comes in. Who manufactures the planes? Boeing and its partners. Who sells the planes? Boeing. Okay, so if you look at that, you understand that Boeing is in full control of product, of design, of finance, of technology, of the manufacture, and of the sales and marketing. Now, let's look at construction. Let's have a look. Let's take an example of a tall building, commercial building or residential building. Who designs the building? It's architects and engineers. Who owns the building? The developer will finance together with banks. Who provides the technology for the building? Architects, engineers, contractor, and suppliers. Who actually builds? Builders and suppliers. Who sells? The developer or the client. So if you look at just this very simple example, you will realize that there is no one company or one person that is controlling the products of the construction industry. Okay, we are too fragmented. This is why we say that the construction industry is way too fragmented compared to manufacturing. This is another example. This is a project here in Melbourne. Look at how many different companies are involved. Very possibly you have fewer companies involved in Indonesia. But over here, we have the client who is the owner, you have the council, you have the project manager, you have the town planner, you have the building surveyor, you have the civil engineer, you have the fire engineer, you have the land surveyor, you have the quantity surveyor, you have services engineer, acoustics engineer, landscape architect, heritage consultant, waste consultant, ESD consultant, wind consultant, traffic engineer. Look, so many people involved. Okay, there are lots and lots of people involved in, this is just in terms of technology. These are all the consultants involved. Can you imagine if you were to ask the builder how many other companies help the builder build? So there will be the builder, subcontractor, and suppliers, and the list is going to be very, very long. So the structure of the industry is also creating this kind of problems. No one single entity controls the construction industry. It's very easy for lots of smaller companies to come in. If you study a little bit more about the construction industry, you realize that many companies fail because, number one, they lack the expertise. There's a lack of understanding of the risk to the construction companies. And the most important reason is this: the companies very often compete based on price, not based on innovation or quality or value. All right, so it's a people business. So this is what I think is some of the features of the construction industry, which we need to understand, and we may then think about how we're going to change this industry. It's a people business. Many of the large contractors in Australia own no equipment, own no machinery. They have very few assets. They have very few workers. They're mostly professionals running project management. Finance, cash flow is king. It all depends on cash flow to keep a construction company alive. Many of the companies are risk averse. They push the risk to the suppliers and to subcontractors. Construction companies are not willing to invest in technology. Construction company profits are very small. Okay, so that again contributes to a whole range of issues. What can we do? I think we need to improve our productivity. We need to increase our profits to a sustainable level. We need to reduce fragmentation. Okay, so let's talk about recent innovations. I'm going to share with you what has been done recently in the Australian construction industry as number one, as a result of COVID-19, and how we can manage to continue building during COVID-19. So these are some of the advantages that we have. Construction has always been viewed as slow to adopt technology, but very recently, I can share with you some of the Internet of Things technology for supply chain management. So this company, Wynomia, created an RFID tag that they can put onto curtain walls. So this picture that you see in the middle here are the curtain wall panels that have been manufactured in China and shipped to Melbourne. All the green items shown in this figure means it has already been installed. All the red items are already on site, waiting to be installed. The purple items, let me just show you here. This basically says that it's in the Melbourne warehouse, so it has arrived in Melbourne. This one means it's in transit. This is in packaging. This is glazing. This is framing, and this is assembly drawings. So you can see that that green part, so that whole section is complete. All right. In transit, so all that section here is on the ship somewhere from China to Australia, and these ones here are still in the factory. Okay, so this piece of software and the associated hardware allows the construction company to track exactly where every component is, even though the component is being manufactured overseas. This is a picture of what it actually is. So these are what we call curtain wall panels. Over here is the Bluetooth enabled round white tag. So the tag is this thing over here. All right. That is the tag that is stuck on to the frame of a curtain wall panel. And the tag is only removed once the panel has been installed and approved by quality assurance programs. So this is one very simple example of adoption of technology in Australia today. Now, remember when I said that during the second spike, the number of workers on the construction site was reduced to half. Okay. Now, if you have only, reduced to 25%. So that basically means that your engineer and your quantity surveyor and your project managers from the client side could not come for a site visit. Do you all agree, right? Because if you are working from home and you're also afraid of catching COVID, how do you go to a site inspection? What do you guys think? I've stopped sharing it because I'm going to show you a demonstration of what goes on. All right, so I'm going to share with you one of this virtual reality screen of a site visit to a hotel project. Can you guys see this? So this is what we call the dollhouse view. Okay, so this is taken by a 360 camera. And if I show you the floor plan, this is the floor plan of the hotel. So this is how one of the more innovative contractors managed to take pictures of their project site and allowed the project managers, the quantity surveyors to actually walk around on site and see how the building is progressing. So this is, if you look at the circles over here, so that tells you exactly where the pictures were taken. So you can actually go on a walk around the construction project. This is a hotel project, and the bathroom pots are prefabricated and craned into position. So it's quite easy for you to see everything. You can walk into every single room. Each circle here means that there's a camera. You can see that the windows are put in. This is actually a curtain wall. Floor slab is up here. Walls. Bathroom is fully complete. This is firefighting system. These are the Services, this looks like wastewater. There's another wastewater pipe over here. Insulation for the bathrooms. Bathroom comes prefabricated. The electrical system is here. The black line over here is the cold water pipe. The red pipe over here is the hot water pipe. And if you continue walking down here, you can see that all the hotel rooms are the same. You can check that all the items have been put in. So over here, the fire sprinkler system is in, wastewater system is in. If you stand over here, you can actually see the camera system. So because of this glass panel over here, you can see the reflection of the tripod and camera. So the camera is actually a very small piece of camera taken by one of the project managers. So that allows the engineers and quantity surveyors to look at the project site. And it also allows me to share this with all the students in Indonesia. So can you imagine, everything's so easy, right? We can just walk around on site, look at how the construction is carried out. It's precast walls, precast concrete slab resting on a steel beam over here. These are where the grout tubes go within the concrete walls. You can very easily walk around. And can you walk into that side? No, we can't walk over there. This is the lift core section, right? These are where the lifts are. So it's quite possible to walk around on the construction site and examine progress of work. Is there anything you guys want to look? I can zoom in on any particular point that you are interested in. You can also measure. So if you just want to see how wide this column is, you click on the measurement tool, click on this button, click over here, click over here. That is 0.37 meters. If you want to see how tall that is, that's 1.99 meters, all right? So it's possible to even use the measurement tool and measure. I should have pulled this point up to the top, okay? It's even possible to actually extract some quantities from some of these pictures. Okay, questions? Any questions?
Can I add something? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Krishna. Yeah, just wonder. It's very interesting, and the technology. Who are supposed to take the pictures there?
The builder, the contractor takes these pictures. My former student works for the contractor. So he has taken all these pictures. He goes out every month and spends 1 hour per floor to take all these pictures. So, and share them with the project manager from the client side, with the quantity surveyors and the engineers.
So basically, when you are a client, you will define procedure to take pictures periodically.
You can, yes, but this particular project was the first project that they did during the lockdown. So they knew that the quantity surveyors could not go to site, the engineers could not go to site. Interesting, yes. So they knew that I have done something like this previously. So I gave them the advice on what cameras to buy and which software to use. So they were then able to do this with very quickly. I think within a month, they could get this up and running, and showed this to many of the quantity surveyors to get their payments approved. Because if the quantity surveyor cannot go out to site, they will not be able to verify the volume of work completed. So this was a very good method of showing site project completion.
Can you also use that for structural quality inspection?
I think it's possible. I think if the structural engineer wants to check on particular aspects of
Connections.
yes, you can actually check the connections. For example, I think the walls are all precast, right? See, you can also check that these are all grouted up. I think if you look very carefully, you can see that the wall here and the wall there has a connecting plate. And that's a supporting equal angle that is bolted in. So you can also see how it's supported, right? So you can carry out a quick quality assurance check that whatever component that is required is put in. This is a strut to support the loads from the floor above. You can also see that the safety measures are there. This is a handrail to prevent workers from falling out. So everything is there. So you can also zoom in, zoom out. It gives you a very good view of how everything is installed. So that whole bathroom is one unit, prefabricated. And I'll show you a video of how all this comes together as well in the next few slides. So there are lots of technology that the builders are using today that allows them to continue construction during COVID. Okay, any other questions? Any questions? Yes.
Much time we need to record all or mapping all of the buildings like this. In I think there are any progress, right? There are always progress. And how much time do you need to record?
Okay, so this was done by a former student of mine. So this is one floor. This is lantai 8 on this hotel project, and he says that he can do one floor in 1 hour. One floor in 1 hour.
One on in one spot or in every spot?
No, this whole picture here, the one I'm showing you, this is one floor, 1 story, and it takes him 1 hour to complete all that.
So your student just only
one person, satu orang.
Naruh apa? Naruh nempatin si tempatnya itu hanya di satu spot gitu.
Bukan satu spot. Every can you see over here that wait. You can see the circle. The circle sudah hilang.
Oh.
There must be one. There must be several circles.
Yeah. Every.
Yeah, I saw that before.
Wait. Let me just reload this one.
Jadi 1 jam untuk cover seluruh.
Yeah. Can you see over here? This one, when I click, so this is one position. This is another position. This is another position.
It's a 360 degree.
It's a 360 camera. Yes, it's camera. A 360 camera. So every circle is one position. Can you see this? That's another one over here. So at every position, he sets up the tripod, press a button on his mobile phone. So it is a Bluetooth connection to the mobile phone.
I see.
Okay, so it's you've seen the setup, right? I've shown you the setup over here. The setup.
The application join all the picture.
Yes, the application will join all the pictures. So the setup is over here. Can you see a tripod in a reflection?
Okay.
Yeah. So all you have to do is take the picture and the software combine everything together.
Is there any limitation to the coverage area? How many coverage area?
No, you just have to pay to use the service. Okay. So if you want to look at the actual software, if you look at the link up here, mymatterpod.com, that's where you get the software. And I think if you can just buy a 360 camera, link it up to them, pay them the subscription. I think the first one is free. You can run a demo if you want to do a demo. But then after that, you've got to pay for all this. Yeah, it's really cool.
Is this the camera the student use, the one reflection and at the mirror?
Yes. This is the reflection of the tripod and camera. The camera is just slightly bigger than a mobile phone. I can give Pak Krishna or Ibu Iris some 360 cameras. Now you can also view this on virtual reality glasses, but then I need a different piece of my graphics card is not powerful enough. So if you have the Oculus Quest, you can put it on and run this on 360 on virtual reality glasses. So then you just move your head. You don't have to use your mouse and click.
The camera took position also, yeah?
No. The software will automatically combine all these pictures.
But there must be some reference for positioning all the...
That's all. See, so there are some gaps in the camera, and some of the spaces are not covered. Yes. So for example, the lift core is not covered because he did not take pictures in the lift core. I can send you guys more information about this. It's actually very cool, especially during COVID-19, where you cannot go to a construction site, but you cannot still view lots of the projects carried out. So my question is, can you guys think of what else we can do with all this technology? Okay, any other questions before I stop sharing?
Oke, Dek. Siapa yang mau bertanya lagi? Silakan. Any question?
I would like to ask a question.
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
Silakan.
Okay, so with the availability option for virtual reality site inspection, is this type of method still going to be used in the future in construction industry? And are there any drawbacks from using this VR method? Thank you.
Yes, it's a very important question. Now, many of us are working from home, working in front of our computers on Zoom and all that. So when I speak to the contractors and when I speak to clients, they are a lot happier having meetings on Zoom compared to having meetings on a site. Because if you think of yourself as a designer, if you are having a meeting in your office on your computer, you can very quickly find the information that you need. If you are having a meeting face to face at a construction site, you cannot find the answers because all your drawings are in the office. All your documents are in the office. Okay, so the builders are now telling me that because of COVID, they are now actually more productive having a meeting on Zoom because you don't waste time traveling. Your meeting is more effective because your consultants have the answers in front of them. So I think in the future, we may have a combination of virtual reality and face-to-face. It is actually very, very cheap to carry out a virtual reality site inspection. You do it once, it may take one worker 1 or 2 days to produce all this, but it is just one worker, okay? Whereas if you have real site visits, maybe 5 or 6 people will have to spend half a day on the construction site. And that would also mean that you need to add in 1 hour travel time and another hour of return time. So a lot of time is wasted. But if you can get on to a construction site with a virtual site visit, it's very efficient, okay? And if you have clients overseas, so say for example, I'm in Melbourne now, you're in Bandung, and you can see a project here in Melbourne. Isn't that amazing? You don't even have to think about traveling, all right? So we think that COVID has changed the way construction industry operates, and it could be for the better. It makes the entire industry a lot more efficient. What do you think? Do you agree?
Yeah, I pretty much agree as well. And from what you're saying is by having this option, there are a lot of benefits from using virtual reality, right? But from your opinion or experience, are there any drawbacks from using this option?
I don't think so. We haven't seen any drawbacks with using virtual reality. It seems to be quite useful. There are only advantages. There's very little disadvantage.
Okay, thank you, Mr. TK.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Ada lagi deh yang mau ditanyakan? Yang lainnya?
Baik.
Oke, Anissa, silakan.
Izin bertanya. Mau saya dalam bahasa saja ya, Profesor.
Ya.
Sejauh ini apakah ada bagaimana dengan pekerja konstruksi yang mana sebenarnya akibat COVID ini juga ada mempengaruhi psikologis. Psikologis ini akan berdampak pada produktivitas juga. Walaupun misalnya teknologi membantu manusia untuk bisa lebih produktif, misalnya dengan 300 dengan kamera tadi gitu. Tapi di sisi lain ada trade-off-nya juga di kesehatan mental pekerjanya. Bagaimana menurut Profesor TK sendiri?
Sorry, what do you mean by kesehatan pekerja? Because I think that by having this camera, the exposure of the workers is minimized. The workers will have fewer visitors. So the quantity surveyor doesn't go to site, and the workers don't have to come into contact with so many people. So I think the risk of transmitting COVID is reduced.
Maybe what Anissa meant was the social or psychological impact when you are not socializing.
Like in mental health type.
Related to mental health.
I don't know, because I think this has, well, if you look at the example that was taken in September 2020, baru 4 bulan lah.
Yeah.
So we have not looked at long-term impact. Yeah, because it only happened in August, September last year. So we think that this will continue. I have many other construction companies talking to us about doing this, and everyone is waiting, is asking for this now, because if you think about the construction sector, many of the designers could be in Sydney. They will have to spend 1 day traveling to Melbourne to have a look at you, to conduct a site visit. So I think with the professionals, it is not a problem. We prefer to work from home, and we want to reduce risk. I'm not sure about workers themselves. The workers will still have to go on site because it's still site work, right? Construction is still site assembly. You cannot prefabricate everything in a factory. But I'll show you another video of a lot of things going on in a factory. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, we can continue having this conversation at the end. So I'm going to share with you a few more slides, and then I think I have another 9 slides. Okay, can you see this one, right? So I'll move on to the next slide. Now, so there are lots of companies coming up with providing end-to-end supply chain information today. So there's this MatTrack is what we call a materials tracking company. They were established in 2017. And like I've mentioned previously, a lot of the materials that we buy into our construction industry comes from overseas. So we need to have a system where we can track where the materials are coming from. Are they coming on time? So this company actually received $5.85 million of funding yesterday. So I checked up on them this morning and I found that they got nearly 6 million Australian dollars of funding. That values the company at $30 million. So this is just a company that provides you with software to keep track of where your products are. Okay, so let me just play this video. 4 minutes. Can I just let me check whether the sound is being shared? Share computer sound.
It comes up, but very small.
Very small?
Yeah. Can you increase the volume?
No, the volume is very small actually.
Hi, I'm Peter Kokonos, I'm the joinery manager.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
At Icon. So I just finished 150 apartments out at Werribee, and that was with Santerre Tivoli. Tivoli is just a supplier from China. Santerre is an installer in Melbourne, and Icon is obviously the builder that's overseeing it.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm working for Tivoli International. We are a joinery supplier for builders in Australia. We have been running a business in this joinery industry for more than 20 years. We have worked with Icon, including Lighthouse in Werribee and also in Leicester in the Carlton.
When you're procuring from overseas, you've obviously got the lag time. You either got air freight or you ship it, and the wait time is too long, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. MatTrack was the tool that brought the overseas procurement together with the local installer with the site team, which in turn helped us deliver a project on time.
Leicester Street, we have well planning from the beginning with the builders. Everything was communicated clearly throughout the whole project. And the tracking system was used both by Icon and Tivoli, and also the installer, CNC Pro.
If our overseas procurement suppliers understand that we're making them fill out MatTrack, if they know that on the 1st of April they have to start manufacturing, and so by the 2nd of April, if they're not, we know there's something wrong. And we know it automatically.
If there was any issues, we were able to know instantly and report it back to the factory.
With our busy schedules, we might not get to our emails till the end of the day or 3 or 4 hours after it's been sent. We don't get to that. It pushes everyone back. So with it being live, we knew that we didn't have to rely on us. It was already on MatTrack for them to see. And we had confidence that it was getting done, which saved us a considerable amount of time. Matrack's made life a lot easier for us in the way that we're not, you know, going to sites, wasting time walking around the site. We know what levels getting invoiced, we know what level we're up to. So life for us as a company is quite good because we can rely on a system that's going to look after the minor details that we don't always catch.
The training for Metro actually was brilliant because it contains 2 languages. So we have a manufacturing system that will be further implemented into the Matrack system, where we have tracking with the productions and also from loading until the shipping, until we deliver the item or the cabinets into the site or our warehouse.
From here on in, all our projects are going to be rolled out by Matrack. For us as a company, to continue what we're trying to achieve and be as professional and as transparent as we can with our clients.
So we saw that that disconnect was there. Matrack helped bring all those components together. And it actually really did.
Okay, so that was Matrack, which is a company here in Melbourne that does material tracking, right? Now, the same project that I showed you earlier with the 360 camera was built by Hickory. So Hickory themselves uses what we call modern method of construction. So they are the builder for the Holiday Inn Express project at Collins Street. Now the picture you see here on the right hand side is it's a fully precast building. Okay, so this is what Hickory Building Solution, HBS, claims to be able to do, right? HBS, let me just get my red, says that they can use 22 people and build 1 floor every 3 days, compared to a conventional build of 50 people on a 5-day cycle. So they claim that they can get this hotel done very, very quickly. So let's have a look at some of the advantages of using the Hickory building system. So what they actually do is that they precast the concrete slab together with part of the curtain wall. Okay, so what you've seen over here is the bit of concrete slab. The curtain wall's not terribly clear, but I think on the next slide shows it a lot clearer. So have a look at this. So that's your concrete slab, right? So this thing over here is your concrete slab. That's your curtain wall. And the curtain wall plus the curtain wall plus the concrete slab is pre-assembled at the factory and lifted into position as one piece. So if you can look at this over here, it's very, very quick because you don't have to align your facade panels with the concrete slab. All that has been done at the factory. It is brought to site and immediately erected in a very, very short time. So this is how they get a 3-day cycle. The structural core is again fully precast. So this goes up to 33 levels. I am quite worried about using a precast building up to 33 levels. You may not be able to do that in Indonesia because of your earthquake problem. But this is easily done here in Melbourne. So let me just show you this video. This is just a very, wait, let me clear all my drawings, stop my annotation.
Number one priority. One of the key benefits of this modern method of construction is...
So this is our Holiday Inn Express project in Little Collins Street in Melbourne. We're delivering this project for a repeat client, being Pro-Invest. We recently finished a very similar version of this for them on City Road in South Bank. The way we're building this, the modern method of construction that we've utilised, is something that talks directly to Hickory's vertical integration strategy. What we've been able to do here is pick the best tools that we've got in our shed to deliver a really high quality, high value outcome to our client.
The key benefits of this construction methodology are safety and quality. On an operational level, safety is our #1 priority. One of the key benefits of this modern method of construction is the pre-installed facade eliminates live edge work. We don't have formwork screens and other inherently risky tasks. And the facade, when installed in the factory, is a safer process done at ground level than being done up in the air. Our next key priority on site is quality. And the quality that we're able to achieve with our pre-finished concrete floors and pre-installed facades exceeds what we can traditionally achieve on site. Another key benefit of this construction method is a reduction in waste. We don't have concrete pumping on site, so we don't have concrete blowback and we don't have leftover steel because everything comes in the exact quantities that we need. Our floor cycles continued at approximately 3 days of floor with the windows installed. By bringing larger components to site with pre-installed elements, we greatly reduced the amount of construction traffic on the roads in and around sites, which is a benefit to not only the projects but also to our neighbours and the councils that we work in. Our prefabricated bathroom pods set new benchmarks in quality and eliminate a lot of reworks on site.
A key part of Hickory's vision is to industrialise and improve the construction process so that we can get tangible improvements in the key metrics of safety, time, cost and quality when it comes to building our buildings. The method that we've used here, which utilises our HBS technology along with our bathroom pods, talks directly to all the self-performed disciplines that we've been working so hard on over the last 11 or 12 years in our business.
Okay, so what you've seen over there was how they, on day 2 or day 3, they put in the bathroom pots. Now, this little video, which is again about 2 minutes, shows you how exactly those bathroom pots are manufactured. It's always done in a factory. It is self-supporting, so it comes pre-packaged in plastic wrap. It's craned into position. There's a sort of a drop down in the concrete slab specifically to position these bathroom pots. So let me just share another 2 minutes of the video with you. I don't think there's sound in this video. Okay, so the bathroom pots arrive on site. It's a special lifting rig that picks it all up. Can you see that it's picked up from the bottom? They lift it up very slightly, and then it's just wheeled into position. See, so just one worker can maneuver the bathroom pots. Well, sometimes you need two, especially when it goes around tight corners. So all that has to be taken into consideration during the design of the buildings. So different sizes, different configurations. They all come with insulation pre-installed. The door is also pre-installed. So that basically means that the inside of the bathroom is fully finished with tiles, with cabinets, with plumbing, fixtures, electrical. Okay, so if you need more information, just get on to some of the, you just Google sink bathroom pots in YouTube and you should be able to get all the links, okay? Oops. Sorry. My apologies. Let me minimize that. Okay, I think that comes to the end of my presentation. Let me just quickly check if that is the last slide. PowerPoint slideshow.
Ada yang mau bertanya lagi nggak?
Yep, that is the last slide. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Questions? Yes. I will give a copy of the presentation to Ibu Iris and also to Pak Krishna. So you guys can request for a copy of this presentation from them later on. But if you have questions, please, questions now.
Mr. TK, I would like to ask a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Regarding your presentation, I believe I heard that you said something about the construction industry being so fragmented.
Yep.
I was wondering if what you think about fragmentation, because on one of your slides also I saw that having several subcontracts diverses the risk for the construction itself. So is centralizing the industry really necessary for the future ahead? Thank you.
Okay, this is a very interesting point. We think that the fragmentation is caused by the way the industry works. There are many specialist companies. Okay, so that basically pushes the skills, the technology, and also the profits, and that becomes too fragmented. So that's why I showed you the example earlier of Boeing and of construction. In construction, you have many small companies looking after their own interests. So if you have a bathroom manufacturer or a plumber making innovations in their own space, they do not share the knowledge with the entire supply chain. They don't think in terms of supply chains. Whereas if you think about in the aerospace industry, the jet engine manufacturer works very closely with the aeroplane manufacturer to ensure that they come up with a better end product. Now, in the construction industry, because of its fragmentation, the main contractor sometimes doesn't even know who their suppliers are. So this is why we say that it's too fragmented and they don't have visibility from one end of the supply chain to the final client or final customer. So think about the disadvantages of being such a fragmented industry. There is no one company or one person that directs all the efforts within the construction industry. And that, I think, is bad. We need to improve the way the industry works. You can see that there are companies that are very innovative, but they don't all work in the same direction. Not like Boeing, not like a car manufacturer. You think about a car manufacturer, you have ABS brakes, you have self-driving cars, you have a lot of technology going into the cars, but they all end up improving the quality of a car. But if you look at construction, it's very, very different. Okay, so think about how the fragmentation is causing inefficiencies within the construction industry. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Yes. Other questions, please.
TK, on the same thread of the previous questions, would that be possible integration of the industry? Maybe for certain sector can be allowed, so that there would be less fragmentation. For example, property developer, they do all the process starting from the design, production, etc., under their own business. Is there any possible resistance or resistance to this approach, in particular related to the regulations?
Okay, very good question. I don't think there are any regulatory impediments for a developer to also become a contractor. There are many contractors who try to develop their own projects, and that's fine. But you will not find many developers also becoming contractor because of the business cycle. So if you are a developer, you cannot guarantee that you have a continuous flow of projects for your construction company. Whereas a construction company can sometimes develop their own projects. So this is why it is very hard to have large integrated construction firms, because we make buildings that are so complex, so expensive, that your clients will buy one building every 10 years. Whereas if you are making a car, you make the car, then you sell the car. With a building, you make to order, right? You wait for the order to come in before you actually build. Whereas with a car, you build the car before you sell the car. So it's a very difficult and tricky situation. That's why I tend to use the Boeing example more, because Boeing builds the planes after they have sold the plane. They get an order first before they sell. So why is it that the construction industry cannot follow aerospace more closely? Because I don't have the answers. I'm just asking the questions. I think the industry needs to sit down and think of the answers themselves.
Yeah, I think, of course, the differences in the nature of the business,
Business is different, yes.
of the market, that is an impediment to this approach.
Well, that is why we now look at build to rent, because if you build to sell, you cannot sell, right? You have to wait for an order to come in. But build to rent may be a good model. Do you have a build to rent market in Indonesia?
I haven't seen any. But on the other side, some of our BUMN, under their holding company, they set up a filial sister company as a property developer. Many our BUMN doing that, and I think they create job for themselves.
Yes. So it's possible to create jobs for themselves if you are a contractor. So a contractor can very easily become a developer.
ada pertanyaan lain dari peserta, terutama terkait COVID sebagai bagian dari safety and health procedures?
Any other questions?
Ya.
Sudah cukup atau mau ada yang ditanyakan lagi? Oke.
Pak, saya boleh nggak, Bu? Saya sedikit tadi. Ya, TK, you compare Boeing industry and construction industry, but as we learn from the basic. Hello, TK, you follow me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, but taking for example private goods, Boeing could be considered as private goods like cars, like handphone. So it is done in the manufacturing from the beginning, end to end users. While construction industry, we keep it up to the contractors or the middle of the supply chain. So we cannot consider in construction industry as a private goods. It is normally, basically, it is normally what we call public goods. So we need to separate design and construction. Do you believe that this is the basic answer to what you question?
Yes, I agree with you for...
Sorry, maybe you have explained all the explanation during your course. I'm not following the total.
No, it's okay. I think your argument works for public projects.
Saya hilang atau gimana nih, Bu Iris, yang lain-lain? Halo?
Kedengeran suaranya Pak Rizal.
Halo?
Yes, Pak Rizal. I think it works for public projects and infrastructure projects, but if it is for private projects or building projects, I still think that there is room to make it more efficient.
Okay, because all parts are prepared as manufacturing. That what you mean?
I'm not saying that we should follow manufacturing. I'm just saying that we should think about how we can change the industry, or do we need to change the industry? I think many of us will agree that the industry is not efficient, but can we improve? Do we need to improve? So I'm just putting the question out there and giving you some examples of how we have changed part of the industry here in Australia. We are prefabricating, we have hickory. So that now the example I showed you, the sink bathroom is also produced by hickory building solutions. So they are now integrating a lot more of the prefabrication into the company. They are also doing a lot of the design themselves. So they now become like a manufacturer of hotels. Remember during the video, one of the hickory managers said that it is for a repeat client. So the client does not need to ask or to engage an architect. They just go straight to hickory and get another identical hotel built. So they become manufacturer of the hotel.
Yeah, let's think again. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ada lagi yang lainnya? Yang mau di
Pak Krisna saya.
Okay. I think there is no more questions from the students, or are there? Saya beri kesempatan lagi. Ya, kalau tidak ada pertanyaan lagi, let us then close our discussion with a large thank you and appreciation to Professor Ike for his very insightful and inspiring class. It is, I mean, it's always interesting to hear another side of the world, what happened there, and we can learn a lot. So thank you very much, Ike, for all your contributions. Dan terima kasih untuk semua yang hadir. Ya, our applause. How to do applause? I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Shall us take a photo together?
Okay, very good.
Ya, Bu Iris, tolong diambil foto.
Tolong semua dinyalakan ya. Ya Pak. Tolong semua dinyalakan kameranya. Ada 4 ini mungkin ya. 1, 2, 3. Oke. Next, berikutnya. 1, 2, 3. Oke, kamera berikutnya. 1, 2, 3. Kemudian yang terakhir, tolong dinyalakan kameranya. 1, 2, 3. Ya, terima kasih. Thank you, Pak Ike.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
See you again.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ike.
Terima kasih semua.
Bye. See you there.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.